Welcome to Lite It Up, a podcast about resilient women balancing motherhood, their careers, personal lives, and all of the challenges that come along with being a superwoman. Each week, you'll be motivated to take action to lead, inspire, transform, and empower. Now, here's your host, Dr. Aginah. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Lite It Up. I am so excited about today's show because I have a very special guest, Kashanna Eiland. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Kashanna is the founder of EEE Youth, which is a nonprofit organization focused on educating and empowering our youth. In addition to that, you're a speaker and a social impact strategist, right?
Yes.
So I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about your nonprofit organization, the work that you do, as well as how you came into being the founder of this wonderful organization, and then how you balance motherhood along with all of the work that you do. So we can just have a conversation. I do have questions for you, of course. But if you could just kind of talk to us about how you decided to launch your nonprofit organization. What was the reason? What was the drive and purpose behind it?
Great question. So I actually co-founded this organization with a childhood friend of mine, Erica Ernest, back in 2008. Mm-hmm. And we sat down in 2007 and just had like a candid conversation because we had both been doing some social work, some work in the community, so not to be confused with social workers. Mm-hmm. So volunteering and just doing other things to have an impact on the west side of Chicago. And we sat down and said, what can we do more? How can we have a bigger impact? How can we take what we learned growing up? How can we take the things that we didn't have and the resources that we did have and put it to good use to help the next generation? So that's kind of how the seed of EEE was planted. 2007.
Was there anything in particular that led you to want to focus on youth? Was there something in terms of, your upbringing or any other social service type of work that you had done in the past that kind of led you to focus on the youth as a population that you wanted to service?
Definitely. So we actually had this grand idea. We had all these things we wanted to do as entrepreneurs tend to do when they're first getting started. Mm-hmm. And what made us focus on the youth is that we realized that we had to kind of scale back. We had to be more realistic with our goals, but still dream big. And what we really wanted to do was help an entire community as much as possible. And we figured who better to impact than the youth who are still at that stage where they're malleable. You can still influence them, but they're also the ones who are going to carry the torch and build on the next generations. So that's how we decided to work with youth. We decided to work on education because, again, just kind of going back to some of the resources that we did receive growing up and some of the resources we didn't receive, we realized that if you're coming from communities or from families that don't have a lot of resources or who don't necessarily have experience with preparing for college, then you may need assistance. But also, if you come from those families or those communities that do have a lot of resources, oftentimes back when we founded EEE, the schools were not doing as much to prepare students for college. Mm-hmm. So we saw a definite need at that time to work with youth and to help them prepare for college.
And a lot of times also, if you do come from a family where, you may have parents who have gone to college, and sometimes they don't necessarily qualify for some of the resources that may be available. Exactly. Simply because then your child is not a first-generation college student. Mm-hmm. With your work, did you also help those families as well in any way in terms of allowing them to participate in some of your programming?
We did. So our focus has been on low to middle income, but primarily low income, first generation. So that definitely that opportunity group. However, we don't restrict our services to people who only fall in that category. So we definitely have students whose parents have attended and completed college. We have students whose parents don't fall into that low income income gap.
So let me just ask you this. Now I know that, with your work, you've touched a lot of lives. If you could just kind of talk about some of the programs that you all launched. I know you did some work with Chicago Public Schools and After School Matters, if I recall correctly. Can you talk about some of the projects that your organization worked on and how you made the selection in terms of who you would partner with?
Sure. So like I said, we started back in 2008. So we've been doing this for a while, and there have been multiple iterations of our programs. Initially, we had one basic goal, which was to help people to get to college and to prepare them for thinking about careers. So that initial program offering was Future Endeavors. We literally had like 10 kids. We used our own money. We were very grassroots, and I was pregnant when I started the organization, so the very first college tour that we did, where we took those 10 kids to visit colleges, I think my daughter was maybe 2 or 3 months old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so, and that also just happened to coincide with the economic downturn. So we didn't have the financial support that a lot of organizations had up to that point, but we always thought it was also a positive because we only had one way to go, which was up. Right. So as we were in business for a couple of years, we learned more about the business. We were able to get more support from different funders, from community partners, and we added the Green Lungs program, which is part of After School Matters, or was that part of After School Matters at that time. And we also added a media program. So our students were learning how to do animation and other multimedia programs.
That sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
How many students over the years do you think your organization impacted?
We have definitely had well over 2,000 students that we've worked with, because our program, so like I said, we have the After School Matters programs, which have been running year-round, both of those programs. We also had the Future Endeavors program, which does college tours. And then we had one program that we piloted, which took some students to visit the Bahamas.
Oh.
Yeah, so that initially had started out with an idea that we wanted to take students to Ghana and do this cultural exchange program. So that's something that will definitely be developed in the next couple of years.
Okay. So for those who may be interested in starting a nonprofit organization, would you talk to us about, I guess, some of the challenges or hurdles, or what a person should expect if they want to start a nonprofit? I mean, you had the benefit of working with somebody that you grew up with, so obviously there's a trust factor there where you guys trust one another to work together. But if someone was interested in starting a nonprofit, what are some of the things that they should anticipate in terms of going through the process?
Well, I would say with starting any business, first of all, there is always going to be more than meets the eye, right? So you're going to go in as a dreamer to some extent with these grand ideas and being very positive about it. And one thing about launching a nonprofit in particular is that I would caution people to not expect that because it's a good idea, because it's definitely going to be something that will help others, that people are going to be lining up to throw money at you to support your cause. And I think the same thing with any entrepreneur is that just because you've got a good idea does not necessarily mean that people are going to be lining up to buy your product or your service. So I think that's the first thing that I tell people, because I do consult now with people who are launching nonprofits and to people who are kind of in that startup phase, is to definitely, for nonprofits, take the business approach. It's a not-for-profit, but you are still a business.
Right. Okay. That's great advice.
Definitely.
And then so you started the nonprofit 2008. It's now 2020, so 12 years later. How did EEE evolve, I'm sure with any organization, you have your goals, and then you analyze those goals to see whether or not you've met your target. How has the organization evolved in the last 12 years?
So I would definitely say, like I said, when we first started, we were shoestring. We had 10 kids, and from there, I would say we did something that I caution nonprofits against at this time, is kind of chasing the funding to a degree. On one hand, it was good because we partnered with funders who had a proven program model. So in a lot of ways, it was almost mentoring us and showing us, this is what you need to do, and this is how it needs to be done, and here are the ways you evaluate. So that was good. But on the other hand, it maybe caused us to grow at a rate that we weren't at first prepared for. We were basically having to adapt in order to meet the needs or the requirements of some of those fundings that we received.
Now, were you doing this work full time?
Yes.
Wow. So if I am looking to just jump into the nonprofit world, would you recommend, or like you said, starting any business, would you recommend that I just dive right into it, or are there some things that a person would need to do to kind of transition into launching their business, or starting a nonprofit?
So when you say dive right in, you mean just like, this is my job, this is
Yes,
it.
this is it.
I think that depends on what type of support you have. Do you have financial support? Do you have money to sustain yourself while you're building and developing this business? If so, then that might be an option for you. For us, that wasn't the case. So at the time when we started, my co-founder and I were both working full time. She transitioned into being more full time with EEE just because of her own situation that occurred with her job. So it was something that she was able to commit more time to before I was. I would definitely suggest, though, for the average person, that you really do some preliminary work before even launching a nonprofit. For instance, doing a needs assessment. So that's something that we did, but we didn't necessarily heed, fully what we found. So when I say that, I mean that we thought we didn't have counselors assist us when we were looking for colleges. This community needs those services, or we didn't have college fairs. We should do a college fair. And what we found as we started going into the areas that we wanted to work in and meeting other organizations and establishing partnerships was that some of these things were already being done. And they were being done by organizations that have been around sometimes as long as I've been alive or longer. So we had to kind of recalibrate and figure out what is the true need. What is it that we feel like we can do a great job at, that maybe we can partner with someone else who's already doing it, which we did, and it was very beneficial to us as a new organization and even as an existing organization to learn when to stay in your lane, when to create something new, when to do what someone else is doing already, but maybe you do it better, or you can partner with them, and then when to create something new because it doesn't even exist, or it doesn't exist exactly like you envision that it can be.
So something that you said that just kind of sparked a question when you talk about staying in your lane, and you're working, you're partnering with someone, another person, where you're working in business organization. How do you figure out how to stay in your lane? Because a lot of times, especially, and I don't want to say especially with women, but sometimes because, women can be a little emotional in terms of their feelings about certain things. But how were you able to maintain your lifelong friendship, right? And then work the business of EEE and everybody kind of, stay in their lane?
We didn't.
Okay.
I have learned so much from the experience of dreaming up, launching, running EEE. It definitely called for learning how to have relationships, or learning how your relationships change when you're in business together or when you are in a supervisory capacity. And also just being a parent. You know, like I said, my daughter, she was in utero when we started this organization. So she is the EEE baby. She hears me say that all the time, but literally her whole life, this organization has been in existence, and it is my third child, you know? So I would say that it was a lot of learning, it takes a lot of communication. It takes you definitely being on the same page with, if you do start an organization with someone else, you must both have shared commitment. And I will say that is what kept our organization alive for the first few years, is that I knew when I was staying up all night working on a proposal and like, oh, I'm so tired, I knew my co-founder was doing the same thing. And so even if I wasn't able to call her on the phone, I knew that I wasn't the only one who was up. So I think shared commitment is huge. Respect is huge. Communication, where you feel like if there's something you don't necessarily agree with, that's huge. And another very important critical thing, which we did do before we started the organization, is to sit down and say, we can't have a whole bunch of chiefs, right?
Right.
So even though you have a board of directors who the executive director or CEO, whatever, however you do your organization, reports to, you have to have some sort of structure. Now, some organizations have co-CEOs, some organizations have CEO, CFO, however you establish it. But if you're going into any kind of business with a friend or with just someone who's going to be a business partner, you have to have that understanding of what are our individual roles. And then if we bump heads on something, who's going to have the final say?
I think sometimes people can shy away from going into business with someone just because, you know, they don't want to damage a relationship or just any number of reasons. But how important is it to collaborate with others? Like you've mentioned, when you guys started your organization, the one thing that you didn't do or take heed to was the needs assessment. So, you know, you made some assumptions, right? And there were already other organizations who had been around, that have been around a lot longer, that were doing some things. When it comes to collaboration, how do you take that first step, I guess, to approach someone who may be doing something that you are also doing, but you have this vision where you know that, you know, you all could do so much more together. So what would you recommend to those who are listening and viewing that they do to, you know, take that first step to collaborate with someone?
I'll tell you how we established our first collaboration. It came to us, and then I'll tell you some suggestions on how to do it. We had this idea that the West Side needed a college fair. And we were like, oh, this is going to be great. So we started looking for locations to have our college fair while simultaneously looking for office space, right? So one of the places that we approached for office space, we were telling them what we had in mind to do as an organization, said, okay, so there's an organization who already does a college fair every year on the West Side. You shouldn't do that. Essentially, they said, but we're going to connect you with them. And this organization was just amazing in that we were brand new, had not been around for a year. We did have like our website and everything. So there was some documentation, but at that point we were still pretty much like a dream, right? And they allowed us to partner at their college fair. They allowed us to present some workshops, so we had instant access to hundreds of people who we wouldn't have had access to. So that's how we got our first collaboration. How I would recommend other ways and how we did get other partnerships is to go to where the people are.
Okay.
So if someone is in the nonprofit world, they're going to meetings, they're going to coalitions, they are going to, if you're in education, you're going to schools, and that's how you're meeting people. And when you go, you're networking. And you're not networking with the purpose of extracting all the time, right? So we know that we can get things from other organizations like we did initially, but we also should be looking at how we can contribute.
Right. Okay, so it's a give and take. You can't go into it looking at what you can get from the group, but how you can also support them as well.
Right.
So fast forward, like I said, 12 years later, I know now you're social impact strategist.
Yes.
Can you tell us, what exactly does that mean?
Okay, so I attended a conference several years ago, and one of the speakers said, what we are as nonprofit leaders, we're not just nonprofit leaders, right? Because people have this idea of what nonprofit is, and the first thing they think, they don't make money.
Exactly.
Right? But
Yeah.
he said, we are social enterprises. We are businesses who do good. So my title, Social Impact Strategist, kind of comes from that vein. It's that I am looking to make a big social impact. And through my years of EEE and in the nonprofit world, I've gained skills that I've been able to help other people who are in the same situation I was in, where they were starting a nonprofit and needed assistance, or existing nonprofits who are looking to scale up or just see how they can improve the programs they already have.
Okay. So now what type of services? You mentioned that you are a consultant.
Yes.
What other services do you offer, and what does that consulting look like? What does it entail?
So I do one-on-one consulting with nonprofits or with people who are starting nonprofits. I assist them with program development. I assist them with forming their board, with board training. Also assist them with evaluating their programs and then making the decision to scale up or to remain where they are.
Okay.
And assisting them with scaling up.
And EEE, you're still doing your work with the nonprofit in that regard.
Right.
Well.
So EEE, though, is not running all the programs that we were running previously. Right now, our focus is on the college readiness.
Okay.
So we're college tours, and then also developing our study abroad program, which we just piloted to the Bahamas.
Now tell me about that. That's something that sounds exciting because, as you know, I work in higher ed, and I know when I was in school, I didn't think about study abroad. Thought never crossed my mind. It didn't cross my mind in high school either, although there were opportunities for to be an exchange student through foreign language program. But why is it important for youth to study abroad, even prior to college, if that's your target?
Yeah, so I should say, yes, our target is high school students for this program. This idea initially was going to be Africa experience. Like I said, we wanted to take students to Ghana, but when we first started, we had these grandiose dreams, and not that it wasn't achievable, but we realized just what an undertaking it was. We had decided that we wanted students, African American students, to have the opportunity to study in areas across the world where people look like them, where they could experience what it is to have a black government, or primarily a black government, or primarily black population, and what does that look like? So that's kind of the basic level of what we had envisioned initially. We ended up taking students to the Bahamas because it was closer. We had some ties to the Bahamas, and it just really worked out well, where we were able to send some of our students who had participated in our Green Lungs program. They volunteered at a farm, so it definitely was in alignment with what they were doing here.
Okay.
And they were able to go to a community center. They recorded a song with the kids in that community center. And for all of the students who we took that inaugural trip, that was their first time on a plane. It was their first time out of the country.
Wow.
So we didn't necessarily set that as a target, but that was another achievement that we had from that experience.
You know, it's so important, I think, for children to be able to see the world outside of their community, outside of that, small radius. I took my children, although it was for vacation. We went to the Bahamas, I think it was in 2016. But we were on a cruise, but instead of going on the excursions through the cruise line company, I paid a local person to take us around the island so that we can really see how people live, because that was very important to me, and also so that they could hear firsthand and hear the history, because
Right.
that's something that they would not have received had we gone on a commercialized tour of. And they still talk about that to this
wow.
day, just spending those hours. Like, we were literally about 4 or 5 hours going around, and just meeting people and taking pictures with people. And so I think that is great that you've given these children the opportunity to be able to not only travel, but to also do something that is, going to help those individuals there. Now, how many students participated?
We had a group of 3 students who
Okay.
went on that first trip.
So then, and you're planning to do another trip in the future?
Yes. So when we do our study abroad program, we obviously that was the pilot, so it kind of was like, okay, how are we going to tweak this?
Right.
So I don't want to say too much about what it is, but definitely would like to do an exchange where we're bringing students here as well, and then where they're staying a little bit longer. So they stayed for about a week when they went.
Okay.
We want to do a longer program. We want to bring students here, not just from the Bahamas, but from other areas, and we want to make more of so we had a relationship with the schools there, but we want to have more school relationships where they're actually able to hopefully get some credit,
Okay.
or at least something that they can bring back to their schools to be recognized.
And this is again for high school
Yes.
age students. Okay. So with your work with youth, and because you are a mom of not one but 2,
Yes.
right? You have a son who's
14.
Who's 14, so he's a freshman in high
Yes.
school, and then your daughter is
11.
How do they? I guess how have they been able to adjust? I know for your daughter, she's the EE baby, so this is all she's known,
That's
right? Did you find that there was I guess where they had to try to adjust with you doing work and supporting and working with other kids who were their age, and you know what I mean? Sometimes when you're a child, you don't really understand what your parent is involved in, especially if it's with working with youth, you know? So how did you balance that in terms of making sure that they understood, like, yes, this is my work, but that doesn't take away from me being your mom and the things that I do with you?
Well, honestly, I hope that's the jury is out, right? Because they're still young, and we know when people hit 18, sometimes they start to evaluate, like, mom was this, mom was that, So I'm still waiting, but I think I did a decent job. I took my children with me as much as I could. I don't think that there was a lot of friction with regards to them seeing me work with kids who are their age. Ethan, my son, he's just now getting to the age where he's, as old as our clients would be. But they loved it. Like, they call them the teenagers.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
are we going to see the teenagers today? We did some elementary school programs. I would take my daughter with me mostly because those are the gardening programs, and she loved it. And those were like friends for her, So I didn't see a lot of competition or feeling jealous about it. And again, that's like all they knew. So definitely I've taken my children on college tours, so.
Which is great because they have that exposure, early on.
Yeah.
I know for myself, with the launch of my book and then the podcast, my children are always like, are you talking about that again? Do we have to hear about your book again? Do we have to hear about Lite It Up again?
Yeah.
So, and they're teenagers, but I think I guess it's a little different because this is something that I started after the fact,
Definitely.
right? And so I've been giving them all of my undivided attention as opposed to this being something that they always knew. So.
Right, because my son was 2, when we started. So this is most of his life as well.
Okay. Let's see. What, I guess, one of the things that I'd like to know is, was there someone who made an impact on your life that helped you kind of realize what your purpose is?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked. Absolutely. My grandmother. I credit her with most of my desire to help people. I definitely feel like I have an innate desire to help people, and that's like all she did. You know, she was big into church, and I used to call her the church van lady because she would make sure that people got to church, make sure people got home. And I was like, Granny, why do we have to stop and drop all these people off? And she was like, because, you know, we have the means. We can help. They need help. We used to go visit people, the sick and shut in, on Sundays after we had been at church all day. Or, you know, during the week, we would be taking people meals who were on the sick and shut in list. So those are things that I find in adulthood beyond EEE that I'm doing and that I make sure my children do. We volunteer with an organization that schedules visits with elderly people, and then we have our person that we go and visit with regularly. And to me, that's important to kind of instill that in them. I hope they see it from the work I do with EEE, but I'm just trying to be more intentional with regards to really like being a global citizen, like beyond the point of being able to just travel where you want, but having a responsibility to other people who are not necessarily your family.
I think sometimes it's hard, of course, as you're growing up and you see your parent that's doing work for others. It's hard to kind of really understand the purpose. You know, my father, he's started a nonprofit organization when I was 9 years old. And I will say that at the time, I didn't understand, you know, why do you have to help all of these people? But as I got older, of course, and matured, lived a little bit, I understand. As a matter of fact, I remember my grandmother used to say, it's just nice to be nice.
I remember that, yes. And I still say that.
Yeah. And it was okay for her to say it, but the fact that she said it clearly means that she instilled it in her children.
Yes.
So I don't know if we want to give that disclaimer or not, but so your grandmother was my aunt, and my grandmother was your great grandmother. So it kind of runs in the blood in terms of, you know, having that spirit where you are giving to others. And I think when you have that type of spirit about yourself, you're definitely going to get your blessings. So I think the fact that you started this organization and you're still finding ways to help people, because you could have certainly kept the information to yourself in terms of what you learned and how you started your nonprofit, but you've chosen to help people along the way. So I think that's commendable and honorable. And your grandmother would be very, very proud of you.
Thank you.
I'm not going to make her cry. Is there anything that you would do differently if you could do everything all over again?
Oh, there are many things, which is why I consult. Because I just feel like that's my way of paying it forward now, is to really assess what we didn't do as well, you know, because we were learning, and the things we did do, and kind of try to help others to avoid some of those pitfalls. But I think one thing I already mentioned is the needs assessment is so huge. And I know people sometimes, and that's not just with nonprofits, but in anything in life, you get so excited about something and you just want to do it.
Right.
And even if you see that it's not necessarily the best thing or the best way or the right time, you're like, I just want to do it. I got this, you know, momentum going. I just want to do it. So I would definitely say to do the needs assessment. I would also say something I would have done differently is to maybe keep our model the way that it, not necessarily the way that it was, but to not be driven by, there's a saying in nonprofits that it doesn't align with your mission. If it doesn't align with your mission, then you can't do it.
Right,
No, there's not even a question about it. Like, can we figure it out? No, don't do it. So that's what I would say. I would say there were times when we maybe did something because it was just a great idea, or because we were passionate about it, or because someone asked us to, and we knew there was a need. But it didn't necessarily align with our mission as much as we would have liked.
And that is obviously, not only is it applicable to that world, but like you said, in anything that you do. I was working with someone because, I do speaking engagements as well, but I was trying to branch out a little bit. And we were doing a needs assessment and also determining who's my target audience, who do I want to speak to, and who do I absolutely not want to speak to.
Yes.
And when I looked at my list, I was clear on, okay, I don't want to talk to men, I was very specific. I wanted to talk to women. I wanted to talk to mothers, working moms, because that's the world that I live in, trying to balance motherhood and having a career. And, before I used to think, oh, you can have it all. That, I'm just going to say, for me, that's just not realistic. You have to determine, I think, what's important. So I call it I used to call it like the Superwoman syndrome. I am not trying to be Superwoman, although I've been called that. But, you definitely have to figure out what's important, what's your mission, and if it does not align with your mission or with your purpose,
gotta let that go.
Right. Do you have any advice for our listeners and our viewers in terms of finding their purpose, branching out, doing something different, transitioning? Because it seems like, with what you're doing, although being a social impact strategist is still aligned with your purpose, but there's a little bit of a transition there, right?
Definitely, there's a transition. So I've been consulting for a while, but definitely more targeted, and have a new initiative that I'm working on that's going to even be different than traditional consulting. With regards to finding your purpose, I want to first say that I think that we can have more than one purpose. We can have more than one purpose at one time, and then we can have a purpose and be really good at that, or really driven, and find more purpose. And I would say that's what I'm doing now. My personal mission is to leave the world a better place than it was when I found it, right? So everything I do, I try to do with that in mind. Through EEE, we've had some definite direct impact. We can point and say, we helped this many students. This is how we helped them. This is what we did. With my consulting, my new initiative, So Go Do Good, the intent is that me, through this So Go Do Good, or as an individual consultant, I'm having an even bigger impact because I'm helping organizations who are able to have an impact. So that's kind of paying it forward. For people who are looking to find their purpose or to get involved or even transition, I would say the number one advice I would give is to listen to people, because people are going to give you advice. So this is a long one, right? Okay, so listen to people. People are going to give advice, and a lot of times that advice is very genuine. It comes from a good place, and you should not be a person who, can't nobody tell me nothing, right? So we don't want to be that, but you also can't be the person who lets someone well-intentioned steer you away from what you know is your purpose. And I've been victim to that. Sorry, I'm battling a cold. Feeling like coming a little bit. But I think that I've had people who are really close to me, who've been well-intentioned, who I've shared things with. Because, being a nonprofit founder it can be a little lonely if you're in the nonprofit world, and there's a lot of established organizations. So you have colleagues who are CEOs or executive directors that you can bounce ideas off of, but you don't necessarily have a founder who is at the level that you're operating, because we know the average business doesn't succeed beyond 5 years, and then you take a nonprofit, you know, the nature of our business is grueling as well. So to have a cohort of people who can understand, you don't necessarily have that. And so you kind of might lament to a friend or a family member, and they want to be helpful. So they want to give you advice when maybe you just want them to listen. You know, so they may tell you something and kind of steer you to have doubt, to go in a different direction when they have limited information to even really give you advice.
Right.
So I would say to be leery, like to be someone who can listen, who can receive information, but then it's your responsibility to make a good decision with the information that you have.
Okay. All right. Well, trying to think if there's anything else that I should ask you before we wrap it up. I feel like there's so much more that we could probably touch upon. And one thing that I think that comes to mind, though, just in that moment, is because you seem so excited, happy about the work that you're doing. Was there ever a time, I'm definitely not trying to end this on a bad note or anything, or a sour note, but was there ever a time where you felt like you had bitten off more than you could chew, or you wanted to give up? Because I think that's real. A lot of times we see on the outside looking in, right? We see everything that someone's doing, but we don't really think about all of the hard work and grueling hours that they've put in. We just see the finished product. Was there ever a time where you just felt like this was too much?
Absolutely.
So
more than one time.
What was it that, influenced your decision to keep on target and continue with your mission?
So 3 things. One is something that everyone can relate to, right? It's like, I put so much into this already. You know, you weigh the pros and cons, like, I've put so much in, is it really worth just turning back and just... So that was one thing. The second thing is what I just mentioned, is the people that you complain to, or the people that you kind of say, this is going on. I had some great people on my board, friends, family, who could see kind of behind the scenes and could see the effort that was going into it, but also could see the great work and just kind of encourage me and say, I got your back. You know, what can I do? Literally, like, what can I do? And then the third thing, which is the most important to me, is why I'm even doing this. And I've literally, like, written on my wall, because in my office I have a dry erase wall. I literally write why, and then I list out all the whys. Why do I even do this? Why did I even start? And it's such a tremendous responsibility. What we're doing is not just for one person. It's staff that, you know, that I'm responsible to. It's the students that we work with. It's the community as a whole. It's our partner organization. So that is the number one thing that motivates me to keep going.
All right. Well, I think that's a perfect way to kind of wrap up this segment. I really appreciate you coming and sharing your experience. I would love for you to come back if you would be up to it.
Definitely.
Right.
And I thank you for having me.
No problem. So, thank you for tuning in to Light It Up. And as always, remember to light it up and shine bright like a diamond. To connect or schedule a consultation with Kashanna Eiland, the social impact strategist, be sure to visit her website at www.kashanna.com. You can also connect with Kashanna via social media on Facebook and Instagram using the handle @Kashanna Eiland. Thanks for joining me this week on Light It Up. Make sure you visit my website at www.lightituppodcast.com or www.aginahmuhammad.com.
You can also find me on social media using the handle at Lite It Up Podcast. If you like what you've heard, please be sure to hit the subscribe button so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, I'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or you can simply tell a friend about the show. Be sure to tune in every Tuesday for a new episode. Until next time, light it up and shine bright like a diamond.